A few years back, and I've been trying to figure out how many years it was, but I haven't been able to, I had taken a day off of work, and I imagine it was probably when I was still in the oil field because I had to do this doctor's appointment. So I took a day off, and before you go to the doctor, you got to fast and all of this stuff. So I tried to make the appointment as early as possible so you didn't have to fast for too long. But anyway, after I went to the doctor, I decided to treat myself to a breakfast. So I went to one of these all-day breakfast things, these restaurants. And I have a habit of when I walk into a place, I kind of scan the place, looking for a seat, but also to see who's in there. And there was a gentleman who was sitting in a booth, and I'm going to say, lack of a better term, he was kind of scruffy, So I sat down at the counter, and the waitress had come around the counter, and she walked up to the gentleman, so he must have got there right before me, and she asked him if he needed anything, and he told her no. So she came back around, and the other waitress said, "What does he want?" And she said, "Nothing, I think he's just warming his feet." Now, a little bit more context, it was probably late October, early November, and it was a little cool outside. Well, I'm sitting there listening to all of these things and seeing this, and I realized the man was probably homeless. So while I'm looking at the menu, the thought goes into my mind, I'm going to buy this guy breakfast. I'm thinking, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So when the waitress walks up to me and she says, what do you have? So I give her my order, and then this is what came out of my mouth, right? I've been ready to tell her that, I'm going to help this guy out. And I said, and if he would like a cup of coffee, I'll buy that for him. That's what came out. That's not what I wanted to say, but that's what came out. So she goes around, she thanked me, and she goes around, and she offered the man the cup of coffee. And he was excited. Yes, yes, please. So she fixes him the coffee, and after that, she's writing up one of these little tickets, and the other waitress says, "What are you doing?" She says, "I'm going to buy him a burger." And the other waitress said, "Well, I'll go half with you." Well, I'm sitting there and I'm seeing all of these events, right? I'm really in tune to what's happening, and I felt pretty good about myself. I said, look at this, I said, I had the opportunity to do all of these things, but didn't do it and gave them the opportunity to be charitable also. I felt good about that. But sometimes we miss opportunities, right? Sometimes we have that chance to help someone, to help our neighbor, but we don't do it for some reason or other. We're focused on what we have to do in life, right? We're focused on our duty, on where we're going or what we're doing, and we don't see the stuff around us. We know what we have to do. We don't see what we need to do. And sometimes I use the phrase because life gets in the way of living. Because we're so busy all the time that sometimes we don't see our neighbor in need. But as Catholic Christians, we have to start to understand and look to see who is our neighbor, to know who that person is, no matter who they may be. In today's gospel, there's a whole lot of things going on in today's gospel that's just not really there on the surface, right? This scholar of the law asked Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says, "Well, how do you interpret it? You know what the Scriptures say. What do you think it says?" So he gives him that phrase from Moses, right? You must love the Lord with all your heart, all your being, all your strength. Jesus says, right. And your neighbor is yourself. But then to make himself feel better, he asked Jesus, but who is my neighbor, right? So Jesus gives him this story. Now in this story, there's a lot going on too. You see, and you have to understand that this guy was a scholar of the law. So when Jesus is telling him this story, he understands everything that's going on. You see, the priest and the Levite, they didn't just ignore the guy, the victim. Because that priest, if he was heading to wherever to do sacrifice, he couldn't go around this guy. If this guy had died and he touched his body, he would be considered unclean. He would have to go through a process before he could do sacrifice again. You see, he was focused on what he needed to do, on where he was going. And the same thing with the Levite. You see, because the law, the prescriptions that they were following said that they couldn't do anything for this guy. So Jesus uses the Samaritan. Now, the Samaritans were despised by the Jews, right? So Jesus, this is almost an insult to this scholar of the law, because the Samaritan ends up being the good guy, because the Samaritan is the one who treated the guy with mercy. But the story doesn't tell us where the Samaritan was going. But what it does is, it tells us that he put everything aside to care for this gentleman. He put everything aside to make sure that this other human being who was in need got the care and comfort that he needed. He put him in his own animal. He didn't say, hey, just follow me, whatever. He put him up in an inn. He paid for his care. And it says the next day. So that means wherever, and he had to be a businessman because he had money, because he left money for this guy to be cared for. And then he didn't stop there. You see, he could have went away. He had already done more than what was needed, but he said, on my way back, because he still had to go do business, I'm going to check with you and make sure everything is going good. You see, he did what I call extraordinary charity, right? He went above and beyond what needed to be done. He took care of this guy's injury. He took care of this guy more than needed to be. He stopped looking at what he had to do and looked at what needed to be done. It was that extraordinary charity. See, so many times in our lives that we miss those opportunities. We miss that chance to be charitable to our neighbor. And who is our neighbor? Sometimes it's not the person that we think we want to deal with. Sometimes it's not the person that we care to talk to or to be around. But God is calling us to this extraordinary charity. He's calling us to be extraordinary in the things that we do for our neighbor. And for us to focus on that call. For us to take away from our daily lives those things that we know we have to do and to start to focus on the things that we need to do. Sometimes we need to put those things aside, those have-tos, to take care of the need-tos. But to go on about the story, you know, when I walked out of that restaurant, I felt pretty good. I saw all of this charity happen. I had a big breakfast, and I was ready, okay, to take on the rest of the day. I got in my car, I cranked up, and I'm driving home, and all of a sudden it hit me. Why didn't I tell those waitresses I would pay for that meal? You know, here were these two waitresses. They gave of themselves, their charity also, but they probably worked for minimum wage and tips. And I had the opportunity to do that extraordinary charity. I had the opportunity to do more than what was needed to be done. And I didn't feel so good after that. You see, we have to focus on the big picture. We have to focus on what God is calling us to do and answer that call.